Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Now available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne.com, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
The Steve Austin Show is brought to you free today by our friends at BetOnline. Get in the mix at betonline.ag and use the promo code PodcastOne for your 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts and exclusive partner of PodcastOne Sportsnet.
PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
Jerry the King Lawler's on the line. Jerry, what's happening, man?
Steve, thanks for having me back again, man. Everything's cool. How about you?
Oh, dude, just when we left off on the last episode, we were talking about promos and everything else, and I've got 5, 6, 7 pages of notes sitting here in front of me, and I hadn't even used them one single time because, man, just in sitting there talking to you, one thing turns into another, and I'm not a classic interviewer by any stretch. It's just two cats from the world of pro wrestling talking.
Yeah, and you know, Steve, guys like you and I wrote a book. I wrote my autobiography back in 2000, and I remember somewhere in the last chapter, or in the early part of the book, I think, I put, when I first started in the business, I would come into the locker rooms and I would hear some of the older wrestlers sitting around telling these old war stories, and then I wrote in there, if I ever get like that, somebody take a gun and shoot me. And then at the end of the book, I think I wrote, somewhere out there somebody's loading the gun right now but you know what? That's just what happens. I mean, you know, that those are your memories, and those are fond memories, and fortunately for you and I, sometimes people want to hear about our experiences that we had during our careers, you know. Every
time I get somebody on the show, there's so much of my crowd comes from the world of pro wrestling, as I do. And, you know, I obviously want to keep growing that audience, but they love talking about the old days. One thing I forgot to ask you last time we talked, and I don't know if this was specific to the car I was in. I believe it's the way the territory was run. I was in USWA. It was 1990, and I was traveling with Chris Champion and Dutch Mantell, and every now and then I'd jump in with a couple of other guys. But for some reason, back in that Tennessee territory, all the boys rode down the road at night after the shows with their dome light on. Why was that? Did y'all do that too?
I don't know. Somehow I started that.
You did?
I did start that, and I think I originally did it to keep myself from falling asleep. I think at first I the first few trips I made, when we would get dark in there, and I always, if you remember, I almost always rode by myself.
Yeah.
And just listening to the radio in the darkness or whatever, I'd get sleepy, and so I just remember one night I said, man, I'm gonna turn this dome light on and light up my car and make it feel like it's daytime, and it just became a habit, and somehow, I don't know, somehow it caught on. Everybody around the territory, in the Tennessee territory, started riding with their dome lights on at night. It was crazy.
I couldn't understand it. I got there and all stuff. We'd ride down the road at dark, and of course, I was driving. I was the wheel man. They're putting gas, and of course, they turn your light on. I said, what are you talking about? We got to turn your dome light on. That's what we do here. And then later on, back in the day, we were drinking, driving down the road. This is back when you could actually do it and not, have any crashes or whatever.
Right.
It's turned absolutely crazy these days. That's 25 years ago, however many years ago it was. But nonetheless, I'm thinking, man, here we are drinking beer with our dome lights going on. This isn't the smartest idea in the world. These guys would make real bad criminals.
That's exactly right. If you remember, we used to play. It was so boring on the road. I mean, because our trips were the same every week.
Every week.
If you're staying in Memphis or Nashville, on Mondays you drive down to Memphis, 200 miles each way, to and from. Tuesday you drive up to Louisville, which was like 170 miles one way, and then Evansville was 150 miles, and Thursday may have been Lexington or whatever. But we had a lot of long road trips, and so we were always looking for anything to do to entertain each other. I don't know if you remember, I was notorious for having a little portable, like a blue light, that I would put up on my dashboard, and I would if ever I would see some, one of the other wrestlers that were past me or whatever, I would pass them. I would pull off at like the next exit, and then watch as they went by, and then speed up behind them and turn this blue light on, and then and at night keep my brights on and the blue light on the dashboard, and they'd tell them, I'd lean out and shout, okay, get out of here, put your hands on your head and face the front of your car. I can't tell you how many times I've walked up and frisked the guys and everything, and goose them or something like that. One night, Kamala was the funniest story ever. He was, he was kind of new in the business, and I just wrestled against him up in Nashville, and I pulled him over about halfway down to Memphis and pulled him off on the side of the interstate, and he's standing there on the interstate, big old Kamala with his hands on top of his head, and so I'm up behind him. I said, "Okay, raise your right foot up in the air." So he's standing there on one leg with his hands on top of his head. I said, "Okay, now jump up and down." And finally he turns around and looks and he goes, "Oh, Jerry."
Hey, you know what? I was down. I was just fixing to get into business. I was playing football at North Texas State University outside of Dallas. I'd go up, watch a Friday night show at the Sportatorium. I'd go to the Saturday morning television taping. And, all of a sudden, here comes Kamala, the Ugandan giant. And y'all did these videos right. Of him. And these were shot in Hendersonville, right there on Jerry Jarrett's property, right?
Yeah, it looked like it was Africa, didn't it?
It did, but break down how Kamala was created, because that was a great gimmick, and people bought into Kamala, man, because, man, when he come down with that hand strike, that was the real deal.
Yeah, it was. Well, I'll tell you what, it was one Monday night. We were having wrestling at the Mid-South Coliseum, and I remember, we'd stand in the back. The guys could stand in the back and watch from around the corner, watch the matches that were going on out there in the arena. And all the wrestlers would come in this one back entrance. And I'm standing there watching the matches, and all of a sudden I got a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's this big black guy, big tall guy, and he said, "Mr. Lawler, my name's Sugar Bear Harris." And he said, "I live down here in Senatobia, Mississippi." And he said, "I wanted to come up here and wrestle for you guys some if I could." And I don't know what happened. I just looked at him, and I said, "Has anybody seen you yet here tonight? Have you been walking around?" "No, sir, just come in the back door." I said, "Would you go right around there and just sit down in my dressing room? Don't let anybody see you." So he goes back there. I went and got Jerry Jarrett. He and I went back there and looked at him. And I swear, there was this artist named Frank Frazetta who did these great fantasy paintings, and it was, as soon as I saw this guy, this painting came to my mind. There's this famous painting where this beautiful girl is tied to a stake, and a bunch of these cannibals are and they're about to burn her at the stake, and a bunch of these cannibals were all doing this like crazy war dance around this girl. That's this painting, right? And that just came to my mind, and so I told Jerry, I said, "Man, I could paint this guy up. He could look terrific." So we told him to be in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Jerry had a 100-acre farm up there in Hendersonville. We took him up there the next day. I pulled out a National Geographic, and if you remember, the reason it was hot was at the time, the president of Uganda was Idi Amin, and he was a cannibal. He was a confessed cannibal.
Wow.
And this guy was the president of Uganda, and that was in the news all over the place. And so that's why it made it topical. And I looked at some pictures. I brought that picture of that painting that Frank Frazetta had done, and I painted Kamala's face. I painted James Harris's face up just like one of those cannibals in that picture. And we looked into the map of Uganda in National Geographic, and Kamala was actually a name of a city in the country of Uganda. And so that's where we came up with the name, literally honed a spear out of a stick and put a wooden point on the end of it, and put this old loincloth on him, took him out in Jerry's back on some acreage back there, and got a couple of pieces of dry ice and threw him out in this kind of little swampy lake that Jerry had. And we put James out there and turned the cameras on and had him come walking through the smoke, and it looked like, it literally looked like he was an African giant that was walking towards the screen. And it was just one of those things that it just clicked, man. We called up and had J.J. Dillon, who was had not ever been in our territory, because we wanted to make him so totally different. So we had J.J. Dillon cut a promo. We explained it to him, and he cut a promo saying that he had found this savage beast while touring the world, and he was going to bring him to the United States, and his first stop was going to be Memphis, Tennessee. And like you said, at the time, man, if you did things right, people bought into it, and they believed that this guy was a giant African cannibal that was being released every time he set foot in the ring, and he couldn't have worked more perfectly. I mean, we had to keep it simple, so that's where the chops came in, all the chops and the slapping himself on the stomach, and he didn't do much more than that. And it bite you, you bite you, and suddenly next thing you know you're bleeding. And I watched some of the tapes of he and I having that first match, and it was was like magic. I mean, he started biting my head, I started bleeding. He would touch my head with his fingers, and started licking the blood off his fingers, and it was just, it really looked exactly like what we told the people he was,
I remember that first, when y'all did that first video, I mean, there was like a 20 or 30 second clip y'all sent out, and it was like, showed him walking just like you said, and whoever did the voiceover is basically like, Kamala, the Ugandan giant.
Right.
Kamala. That was it.
Yep.
I was like, I got to see this son of a bitch. This son of a bitch is crazy looking. Whose idea was it? Was the moon and the stars on him? That all came from the painting. It was great.
That Frank Frazetta, I'll show you sometime. This Frank Frazetta, I later on became friends with him. He was one of the greatest artists of all time. But anyway, that was just the way that the guy body was decorated in that painting. And it's a funny story. For months, every night I would paint Kamala. I would do his face and all the paint on him down in the locker room beforehand, and I would paint those stars and the crescent moon on his stomach in yellow, and the stars on his pecs were white. And the funny story, one night after about 3 or 4 months of painting James, and you'd have to know him. I mean, he's just a big old teddy bear. Actually, that's what he used to wrestle as before Kamala. He wrestled as Sugar Bear Harris. But anyway, he just kept sitting there, and I'd paint him up, and he'd be patient. And then one day, finally, after about 3 months, he looked down and he said, Jerry, I want to ask you a question. I said, what's that, James? He said, why did you paint the big banana on my stomach every night? I said, James, it's not a banana. It's a crescent moon. He went, oh, okay.
All that time he thought it was a banana and it was a
I guess
rib?
he thought I would have making some kind of joke on him or something like that.
Oh, Jesus, that's
he
great.
thought I was painting a big banana on his stomach.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
You've had some, your classic feuds with a ton of people, with, from Terry Funk. Oh, we got to talk for a second about that Terry Funk empty arena match. We talked about that a little bit earlier. What was the deal with the empty arena match?
If you remember, Stephen, I mean, in the territory days, you worked the same towns every week, and usually once a week. I mean, those days are certainly gone with the wind now. I mean, the WWE will hit a city, if you're lucky, twice a year. But back in the day, it's just like, for instance, our major city was Memphis, and we did Memphis every single Monday night. We had live wrestling every Saturday morning for 90 minutes on Saturday morning TV in Memphis, and then that was like basically a 90-minute long commercial to come to the show at the Mid-South Coliseum on Monday night.
Yep.
It was week in and week out. So, man, you were under the gun to, like you said the last time I was on your show when we talked about Jerry Jarrett promoting, he and I were under the gun every week to try to draw a crowd. I mean, that building had 12,000 seats in it, and you were just looking to put as many people in there every Monday night as you could. And so when we would get somebody like a Terry Funk, a big name like Terry Funk that could come in on a weekly basis for us, that was a big deal, because it was hard to get somebody to come back week in and week out, week in and week out. So what happened with Terry? We got going, and we were just doing such a good run. We'd probably worked 5 or 6 straight weeks there. I swear if I'm not mistaken, it may have been Terry's idea in the way he cut a promo one week. He just said, it's hard to get a fair shake in this Memphis, this Lawler's hometown. He said, it starts from the minute I land in an airplane coming in from Texas. As soon as I get off, I get picked up by the cab driver. he starts talking about how bad Lawler's going to beat me, and then he drives me 10 miles out of the way, so he charges me extra in the cab. You know, and he said, everybody, you know, they delay my baggage because they know I'm coming in to fight their hometown hero. He said the fans are on Lawler's side, the cops are on Lawler's side, you announcers are on Lawler's side, everybody. Let me just tell you, if I could ever meet Lawler on a common ground where he had no advantage, where he didn't have anybody to help him, anybody, no referee on his side or anything like that. So that was the premise of this thing. He had a piece of paper in his hand. He told Lance Russell, he said, here's a paper with a place and a date. And if Lawler will meet me there, nobody but him and me, no referee, no fans, no nothing, I will beat him within an inch of his life, and I'll prove to everybody in Memphis what a phony he is, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about. And then, of course, we did it. You know, we did it on a Monday afternoon before the matches were that night.
Oh.
You know, he flew into town. And so we had the arena already set up for the matches that were going to be that Monday afternoon. So he and I just went over to the Coliseum early. Of course, nobody but Lance Russell and the cameraman was there, and that's where we had the match.
But how was it working with just all that silence? Because you listened to a crowd as good as anybody in the history of the business. And it certainly had to take the adrenaline out of it.
It was really unusual. I mean, that was the first time I'd done anything like that either, you know, and so it was strange. It was different. But Terry, you know, if you ever go back and watch the footage, Terry was never quiet for 1 second during that match. He was always shouting or yelling or something, so it wasn't exactly like it was completely quiet, you know. But I just wish we'd have done more outside the ring and thrown into the chairs and different things like that. But it all led up to the big finish of what Terry had busted the ring steps and had this big jagged piece of wood, and he got me in the ring, and he was just about to stab me with that piece of wood when I kicked it back, and he gouged himself in the eye. And, of course, the blood started flowing out of his eye, and then the classic, unforgettable thing, my eye, my eye. And it was just so great, you know, and just what made it so different was, you know, Terry made it look like this, it was real in the fact that, hey, nobody was there, and this wasn't really going to be on TV or anything, so he was cussing. It was like a Stone Cold promo, you know. He says, where is that son of a bitch? I told you that yellow bastard wouldn't show up, you know, and this was unheard of at the time, so you knew he was going to bleep it out, but it made it seem so real.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about Andy Kaufman. You guys had a damn feud, and I watched that thing. Of course, I remember back in the day. Whose idea was it to bring Andy Kaufman in?
It was Andy's idea.
So what did he do? Did he reach out to you and call you?
He reached out. The first thing Andy did, and let me just give you a real quick background on Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was from Long Island, New York. He grew up as a kid being a huge wrestling fan. I mean, he told me he used to watch Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, and the funny thing about the wrestling had a major influence on Andy's entire career. He used to tell me, he said, I was amazed at watching this Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, that somebody could go on TV and intentionally, he said, I could tell he was trying to make the people hate him. And he said, but yet he was still popular. And he said, that just like struck a chord with me. And as Andy grew up in his performances, he always had that in the back of his mind. Andy would tell you, and he told me many times, he said, I'm not a comedian. I never told a joke in my life. He said, I'm just a performance artist. And he said, I just like to do things to elicit a response from my audience. And he said, I enjoy getting a negative response. I enjoy when people don't like me. And so he would do a lot of that sort of thing and throughout his career. But then when he became the Lotka character on Taxi, and Taxi was the #1 show in America at the time, the highest rated show on TV, and Andy just wanted to use that celebrity status that he had to sort of live out a fantasy of his, and that was to be a bad guy wrestler. And so he started doing that in some of the nightclub comedy acts that he did and comedy clubs and things. He would invite women up on the stage to wrestle with him, and he'd have some mats down, and he'd have his friend Bob Zamuda dressed in a referee shirt and come out, and he just played the role of bad guy wrestler. He'd insult the women and do all of this sort of degrading comments to him, and then he'd wrestle him and actually beat him in a wrestling match. And he did that for a while. He did it on Saturday Night Live and on the Merv Griffin show and different places. But he wanted to wrestle in front of an actual wrestling audience. So one night in New York, I think the show was at Long Island, and he went to the show and he approached Vince McMahon Sr. at the time, And, he introduced himself and said that, and told him what he had been doing. And he said, I just want to wrestle and wrestle in front of actual wrestling fans, in front of people that came to see wrestling and see the response that I'll get doing it there. Fortunately for me, Vince McMahon Sr. said, well, Andy, he said, I'll be honest with you. He said, our fans are kind of skeptical anyway. And he said, I'm just hesitant to involve a Hollywood actor in our shows. He said, I'm just afraid that the people might think, that we're all actors and that we're all acting. He said, so I appreciate it, but I'm going to pass at this point.
He was 30 years too soon.
30 years too soon, exactly. But my friend Bill Apter, Bill Apter,
yeah.
He was the editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated or a photographer and writer for them. He overheard the conversation, and he knew Andy. He grew up in the same town as Andy. And he told Andy, he said, hey, you know what? And, of course, Andy, all he knew was New York wrestling. So Bill said, hey, I got a friend, Jerry Lawler, has a territory down in Memphis, Tennessee. He said, I'll bet he'd be interested in this. Let me give him your number. And so out of the blue, I get a call from Andy Kaufman, and he's talking about coming down, and he just told me the same thing that he told Vince McMahon Sr., and I thought, God, this guy's one of the biggest stars on television.
Right.
Of course we'll have you come down to Memphis. That's how it all started. He came down literally just wanting to wrestle women out of the audience, and he did that. We sold out immediately. The people hated him. He cut some promos talking about the women, talking about the South and all of this sort of stuff.
Did you help him with his promos, or was that just all him doing his thing?
Well, the first one he did, he sent one in that he just did on his own. And the next ones, he actually came over to my house, and we sat down and we cut promos with Andy, and he and I just came up with them for about an hour. And because, he wasn't going to be able to come back every single week, so we wanted to have plenty of promos in the can. And I swear, after the first 3 weeks of showing his promos, the TV station manager called up and said, Jerry, you guys, we can't show these Kaufman promos anymore. And I said, why? He said, oh, my God, the people with the phone calls, they're threatening to burn the station down. If we continue to show them, he said, these people, the fans hate Andy. They don't, and of course, what we had done, I gave him a bar of soap, and he cut the promo saying, let me introduce you to people here in the South to something. This is soap. Say it after me. Soap. He said, not soap, it's soap. And he said, what you do is you put it under the faucet, run some water on it, and rub it around your hands. It'll make lather. Put it under your arms and wash under your arms. And it's like, just insinuating that people in the South would never bathe. Then we'd cut a promo the next week of a roll of toilet paper. And he's telling a story like the people in the South had never even seen toilet paper. And so the people literally hated this guy. And we went for several weeks of him wrestling the women, and then I'm thinking, I got to get a way to get a rub off of this big Hollywood guy. So I went to Andy, and I said, and literally he was not thinking of doing anything but wrestling women. And I said,
really?
Absolutely. He never once thought of having a match with a man.
Right.
And that's what I told him. I said, Andy, this is going to only go so far, and we need to keep this going. I said, you need to wrestle a match with a man. And he said, oh, no. I'm the intergender wrestler. I don't want to do that. And he said, I'll get hurt. And I said, look, you and I can have a match, and I promise you won't get hurt. It'll be simple, but then most of it will be the build-up, the lead-up to the match.
Yes.
It'll be tremendous, And I said, we can just do anything to get out of it. And that's how the match came about. And then, of course, we really didn't, if you remember, we didn't do anything in the match other than drop him on his head with a suplex one time, which he told me later knocked him out. And
yeah, but that was great.
I gave him a couple of pile drivers. And as the match was over, they disqualified me, and as the match was over, he's just laying there. And so our referee, Jerry Calhoun, and then we had to turn away crowd, 12,000 people there, and they were all up around the ring, and they were so happy that Andy had finally got what he deserved, and they're screaming and hollering, and Andy just laid there motionless like he was dead,
Yeah.
So I'm walking around, holding my hands up, and finally the crowd's kind of, yeah, and I'm thinking, well, okay, it's time to get him up and get him back to the dressing room. So I told Calhoun, the referee, I said, all right, go over and lean over and tell Andy, to help him up and get him back to his feet and get him back to the dressing room. So Calhoun walks over and he kneels down, and I'm just still walking around and looking at the crowd and waving. And so Calhoun, I see him talking to him. So then Calhoun comes back to me and he says, Andy says he wants an ambulance. And I said, an ambulance? He's not hurt. I said, no. I said, just go over and help him up and just tell him, you get some guys to help him back. And I said, just act like he's hurt on the way back to the dressing room. And so Calhoun goes back over again and says, tells him, and then a minute later he comes back to me and says, really, he really says he wants an ambulance. And I said, go tell Andy that an ambulance costs about $300 to come out here. And I said, plus, where are they going to take him? You can't take him to the hospital. And I said, tell him it's too expensive. We're not going to get an ambulance, right? So Calhoun goes over and kneels down beside Andy again, and Andy's still not moving, just his mouth. He's saying a few words. And the referee comes back over to me and says, he says he'll pay for it.
Oh, God, that's great.
I said, well, okay, if he'll pay for it, tell him to call an ambulance. So next thing you know, they call the ambulance. We wait there another 15, 20 minutes. He's still there. The crowd wouldn't leave. They're all there, and he's laying there like he's dead. And his manager, George Shapiro from California, was there, and his writer, Bob Zamuda, were there by his side, and his girlfriend. And so finally in comes the ambulance. They put him on the stretcher, and they put the neck brace on him, take him to the hospital. He goes through all the tests, and he stays in the Memphis hospital for 3 days with his neck in traction.
Are you kidding me?
3 days he stayed in the hospital with his neck in traction.
But he's okay. He's just working the gimmick.
Yeah, he's okay. He's working the gimmick.
But go ahead and book that out. This was him on the fly thinking this is what I'm going to do.
Absolutely him on the fly thinking this is what I want to do. That's just the way he was. He was a genius. I mean, and even the bit on Letterman was him on the fly. I mean, it was...
Well, let's talk about the Letterman thing. A little pause for the cause, but we're going to. I'm talking to Jerry the King Lawler. We're talking about his famous feud with Andy Kaufman. We'll take a little break. Thanks to my sponsors keeping this show on the air for free, laying down serious audio whoop-ass.
A true crime podcast.
It got me upset because this is someone's kid, and someone knows she's gone.
That takes a different approach.
It was shocking for something like this to happen in our little town.
Focusing on the communities affected by life-shattering crimes.
It made news throughout the entire region that these two people had been shot while they slept in such a safe community.
To give a new perspective on the devastation crimes can cause.
It was shocking for something like this to happen in our little town.
Featuring cases from quiet towns to bustling cities and interviewing the people closest to the case.
My first thought was that it's an unusual location for us to have a homicide.
Listen to the true crime podcast City Confidential and step beyond the yellow tape to learn just how far a crime can reach.
There are certain cases in the history of Boston that I think sort of define the city. I think this is one of them.
New episodes of the City Confidential podcast are available every Thursday. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Brother. Andy Kaufman selling the pile driver in the hospital for 3 days. I'm talking to Jerry the King Lawler, the man who delivered this pile driver. So before we left to a little break, Jerry, the pile driver, heard around the world. Andy Kaufman shells out $300 to bring your ambulance out. You tightwads, looking at the bottom line, don't want to spend 300 bones on an ambulance. So he's in the hospital for 3 days. And so then you go to visit him, obviously, or call him. So what do you guys do to book the next part of this?
Oh, no, I did not go to visit him at all. No, I didn't do that or call him or anything. It was just like he was there for 3 days, and then he went back to Hollywood. And the next call I get from Andy was just one day out of the blue, and he said, hey, do you want to be on the David Letterman show? And I said, let me think about it, Andy. Yeah, I want to be on the David Letterman.
Dude, straight up, that's a shoot. He was in the hospital 3 days. He was in the hospital for 3 days. He goes back to L.A., and then down the road, you get a call, and he says, you want to be on Letterman.
Exactly.
Y'all hadn't talked.
Had not talked. No.
Okay, go ahead. So what happens?
I said, well, what do they want us to do on Letterman? And he said, I don't know yet, but he said, it's this. He said it's a big network TV show, and I just thought it'd be cool. It'd be a way to keep our feud going. And I said, yeah, of course. And so, then they got back with me with the day. He said the Letterman people would be calling me, so they got back with me with all the travel arrangements.
Now hold it. When you say yeah, of course, you're thinking yeah, of course, because you want to be on TV, or yeah, of course, we can keep this feud going.
Well, both.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I'm with you.
most of all, I want to be on TV, on network TV.
Okay.
That's the most. But then I'm thinking, I mean, we had done nothing but draw sellouts with Andy, fighting the women, and then the sellout with me down in Memphis.
So he had heat, and he was selling tickets.
Oh my God, huge,
Gotcha.
Absolutely huge. And he just got it as far as being a bad guy, as being a heel. I mean, he just had that natural instinct in him, and he knew how to play it off. And he knew, once again, we talked a long time ago about personal issues. He made it personal by attacking the women and attacking the people from Memphis.
Right.
And that just made everybody there. It was a personal issue with him. And here's this, I'm the big star. I'm from Hollywood, and you people are just a bunch of hillbillies, a bunch of hicks. So when they contacted us to be at the Letterman on a certain date, and I flew up there and got to the Rockefeller Center there, and they had us meet early in the day. They filmed Letterman at 5:30 in the afternoon, so they met with us about 10 o'clock in the morning. They met with only me. When I got there, they said, "Well, Andy didn't want to be around you, so I'm going to have you meet with." I met with this Bob Morton, who was the big producer of the show at the time. He said, "Well, here's what we want to do. We've got the footage of you pile driving Andy. We're going to show that, and we're going to show Andy making some remarks about the women and about the South and that sort of stuff." And he said, "That'll be in the first segment." And he said, "Then we want you and Andy to talk a little bit, and maybe in the first segment be a little bit antagonistic towards each other, not too much." And he said, "Then Dave will take a break." And he said, "Then we'll come back in the second segment, and during that segment, Andy will apologize to you for making fun of wrestling, and you apologize to Andy for dropping him on his head with a pile driver, and then Andy will get up and sing, 'What the world needs now is love, sweet love.'" That's the way they had it laid out. That's what they told me. And then I left and went in the cab back to my hotel near Rockefeller Center, waiting to come back at 5:30. When I was back in my hotel, Andy called me and said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, what do you think about what?" He said, "Well, what they want us to do." And I said, "Well, I mean, it sounds like it'll be funny." I said, "But it'll probably pretty much be the end of our years of my feud with you and I apologizing to each other and everything being smoothed over." And he said, "Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking too." But then he said, then just out of the blue, he hesitated a little bit, and he said, "Wonder what would happen if you just hauled off and slugged me." And it was so funny because usually you say, "Well, if you just hauled off and punched me or something," but he used that term. He said, "If you just hauled off and slugged me." And I said, "Well, Andy," I said, "first of all, probably I'll get arrested." And I said, "I don't want that." And I said, "Second of all, they won't show that. They just probably won't even show it." I said, "We may have made this trip for nothing, And he said, Yeah, you're probably right, but wouldn't that be great?" I said, so that right there is just the way. That's the last time I spoke to Andy.
Straight up.
Before we went on the air. And it didn't seem at the taping before we walked out to be on there with Letterman. There was no other talking or planning about what was going to happen. It was all from that point on, it was just all flying by the seat of our pants. It was just all improv or winging it, if you want to say. I just knew that we went through the first segment and we were sort of antagonistic a little bit. And I realized why at that point, because when it was time to go to a break, they had a wrestling ring bell under Dave's desk,
right.
And he could ring it with his foot, right? And so it was like he made it look like things were kind of getting out of hand, and he started ringing that bell, and he said, "Okay, all right, we need to settle things down here, and let's take a break, and we'll come back and see if we can get the hoses out and see if we can calm things down a little bit, right?" So we took the break. And during the break, Andy got up and walked away. They turned the lights down because it gets so hot in the studio. They turned all the lights down. There was a studio audience, I think, about 650 people in this studio, right? So anyway, just the 2 minutes go by for the break, and they say, "Okay, we're coming back on in 3, 2, 1." They turn the lights back up. Boom, we're back on. Andy sits back down. And so Dave starts talking again. He says, "Well, Jerry, do you think you owe Andy an apology?" And I said, and I don't know why. I said, "No, not really." So it went from there. It just kind of escalated. And
right.
He didn't apologize to me, and I didn't apologize to him. And I think in watching it back, when I look at Dave's face, I think that's the first time he realized, something's not going right.
Right.
It's not the way we planned this, right? So then suddenly Dave I guess he thought, well, we're out of time for this segment, so it didn't go like we wanted to do. So he said, "Well, you know what? We're going to take a break here, and we're going to see if we can get things sorted out." So I knew that was our second segment, and we were done after that.
Right.
So when Paul Schaefer started playing the music, and I swear, Steve, when I watch it back, it's like an out-of-body experience. It's like I'm watching somebody else do something. I don't even recall doing it. I just suddenly stood up. looked down at Andy, made eye contact with him, and I think at that moment he realized what I was about to do, and man, I just slapped the taste out of his mouth. Knocked him right out. I hit him as hard as I could. Knocked him right out of the chair over onto the floor, and the music stopped playing, and everybody was just like just like this hushed silence. And I watch it back, and Dave is just like, he wouldn't even look at us. He's just like staring straight ahead, like, oh my God, what just happened, you know? And so anyway, the security guard comes over and grabs me and takes me back to the green room. And then I can hear this commotion going on out there. Like, you know, Andy gets up and starts just ranting and raving and screaming and all of this sort of stuff. And so usually they just take a break for 2 minutes, and literally about 15 minutes went by while all this commotion was going on, and then finally it sort of quieted down, and I'm just sitting by myself in the green room, and suddenly the door kind of opens up a little bit, and this intern sticks his head in, and he said, Mr. Lawler, I think he was thinking, I'm going to stick my head in here with a killer.
Yeah.
I was the first person to ever strike another guest on a talk show ever in history, right? And so he says, Mr. Lawler, Dave was wondering if you'd like to come back out and sort of wrap things up. And I said, sure, I'll do whatever. So I go back out into the studio, and Andy's way over by the door. And I sit down by Dave again. And the crowd had turned into sort of like a wrestling crowd. All of a sudden, these 650 people start booing me as I come out, right? And so then I sit down, and they're going like 10, 9, and Dave looks over and said, Andy, are you going to come back in here or not? And he says, no. If I do, I'll say words you can't say on television. And he says, okay. And it was 3, 2, 1. We're on, and Dave says, well, I'm here, and Jerry Lawler's here, and Andy Kaufman's here, and some nights I wish Tom Snyder were still here, which is, you know, he's just taken over for Tom Snyder on the show. So anyway, he said, well, Jerry, I'd like to thank you for being here. And right about that time, Andy comes in off set, standing behind Dave, and he starts pounding on Dave's desk and screaming every kind of obscenity you can think of.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, he's just cussing, F you, F this, mother this, and one thing you had to know about Andy, and I think this is what really sold Dave on the deal, was Andy didn't ever curse or swear or get upset or anything like that. And for him to be doing this was just so out of character. But I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Andy, what's wrong with you? You know, they're obviously going to show the slap, or they wouldn't have us back out here. And now here you are, you're totally ruining it now. I was just thinking, you know, this is never going to get aired. So with my body language, I try to sit back in the chair and just like cross my leg, like show my disgust with Andy. You're killing it, right?
Yeah.
And so he grabs Dave's coffee, makes eye contact with me to let me know what he's about to do, and he throws the coffee so that I can get out of the way of it. And I jump up again, and then he runs off the set again. The security guy comes back again, and Dave was just so frazzled. It was just unbelievable. So the security guy takes me off the set again and takes me straight to the elevator. And he and I get on the elevator, and I'm thinking, oh, what's he going to do, take me down and lock me up or whatever? And as soon as the door closes on the elevator, the security guard says, man, I just want to get you out of the building. He said, because that Kaufman is an idiot. He said, his elevator don't go all the way to the top floor, and he's probably going to try to have you arrested. So let me get you out of here.
God.
So he takes me downstairs. I get in the cab, and I go back to my hotel. I didn't hear from anything from anybody. And this was like at about maybe 7 o'clock or something. And the show, of course, came on at 11:30, and I didn't hear a word from anybody. And I'm thinking, what are they going to do? Are they going to show this or what? So anyway, I turned on the TV at 11:30, and there it was, the whole thing. They showed it all, except, of course, when Andy started cursing and swearing, they bleeped it out, but they didn't put in beeps. What made it even funnier, they put in these little cuckoo, cuckoo. Every time he said a cuss word, he said cuckoo.
There was a lot of them.
It made it, there were a lot of them, but it made it hilarious, you know. And then as soon as that show went off the air, as soon as that segment went off the air, man, my phone blew up. It was like the New York Times, it was like the New York Post, the Daily News, you know, the Inquirer magazine. Everybody you can think of started calling about that. And then the next day, it was on the front page. Pictures of me slapping Andy was on the front page of every New York newspaper. You know what? Just last week, Steve, the TV Guide had on the front cover and a big story about the top 60 most riveting moments in television history. And that is, it says in there, wrestler Jerry Lawler fights with Andy Kaufman on the David Letterman show. It was one of the top 60 still to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, the number one is like the Beatles making their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, Elvis Presley appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, and it goes all the way back to television history, and that is included in the top 60 most riveting moments of pop culture. You know.
Well, when you guys are doing this angle, and it was tremendous. What do the other boys think about Andy?
Man, well, you know what? We kept him away from everybody else, and Andy was different in the fact that he would do meditation before a match. So he had his own dressing room. Nobody was allowed to bother him because he would literally meditate for like an hour and a half before it was time for him to go out and do anything. So
Straight
we
up
kept him away from everybody. He was sort of a strange duck in the sense that he had these little he was different from what the guys, from what we were used to being around. But by the same token, he was the nicest guy ever, most respected, loved the wrestling business. I mean, Andy and I were the same age, and he never referred to me once as Jerry. He always called me Mr. Lawler, and I would always say, come on, Andy. But he just, he was so respectful of the business and wrestling. And he told me before, he said, I'd give up everything I'm doing in Hollywood. I'd give up the taxi, all the TV shows, everything, if I could just stay involved with wrestling. That's how much he loved it.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Here's a message from our sponsor, ZipRecruiter. Right now, we cannot be overwhelmed. We have to work to keep our loved ones safe and protect our communities. We have to work to stay strong, to stay connected, to stay focused. We have to work to inspire, to innovate, to build new solutions. But for all of this to work, we have to work together. As ZipRecruiter, we connect employers and people every day, but today is different. We are partnering with first responders, government officials, the medical community, the innovators, and the manufacturing, transportation, and food distribution industries to make sure we are finding the right people for the right jobs right now. Let's work together. ZipRecruiter.com/work together. Well, you guys are feuding 82. Did that carry into 83? Because he died in 84.
Absolutely. I mean, carried right up until Andy passed away.
Yeah. So was he feeling the effects of the cancer? So how was he to deal with? Was he feeling?
No, you know what? None of that ever showed. That hit Andy so fast. But Andy and I had, after that he came back and we had match after match. We had it down to where he was doing boxing matches, saying that he'd been trained by Muhammad Ali and showed all of this kind of stuff. And then he started bringing in people like Ken Patera, Jesse the Body Ventura, and all of these guys with a bounty on my head that he was going to pay anybody $5,000 that could hospitalize me with a pile driver. And we just kept it going week in and week out, and Andy just kept coming back. And then one week, if you remember, I had a thing on Sunday morning called the Jerry Lawler Show. That was on Sunday mornings, just a 30-minute talk show with wrestling as a centerpiece, and I had Andy on as one of my guests on there one morning, and he was in another studio, and it made it look like he was out in Hollywood talking, and it was around Thanksgiving, and we were doing this little segment where we was called the biggest turkey of the year, and we were going to superimpose Andy's head on this turkey's body. And I'll never forget, they had the camera on Andy, and he was sitting over there, and he said, let me tell you something, Lawler. If you put my face on that turkey, I'm going to sue you, I promise you. And he was coughing throughout this.
I remember that.
Yeah, and then after that interview was over, he walked over in the studio and he said, Jerry, well, he didn't say Jerry, he said, Mr. Lawler, he said, I apologize for coughing during that. He said, but I just this past week got diagnosed with cancer. And at the time he thought lung cancer. And so anyway, that was the first, and I just like in the movie, I said, oh, Andy, that's not funny. And he said, no, I'm serious. And so then right after that, he started going and getting treatment, and then he immediately started losing his hair, and then that once he lost the hair, he didn't come back anymore. And then the cancer was so fast acting, he only lasted about 3 months after that.
Oh man, that was rough.
Yeah.
How was your experience making Man on the Moon? The story of Andy Kaufman.
Well, I mean, certainly I had a great time. I enjoyed it. The only exception was the fact that it was tough working with Jim Carrey, because for some reason, one reason or other, Jim Carrey was so, I don't know if it's method acting or whatever, but he was so he was wanted to be so in character, he would show up every day on the set already dressed, already in makeup as Andy. Nobody, even the director, and the director was Milos Forman, who directed Amadeus and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
He was one of the most famous directors ever. Even he was not allowed to refer to him as Jim Carrey. Everybody had to refer to him as Andy.
Right.
I mean, and so that's how in character he was. And so apparently, one day I asked Milos Forman, I said, does this guy, has he even read the script? Does he not know that Andy and I were really friends? Because he treated me throughout the movie like Andy and I acted always on television,
right.
like we were bitter enemies, you know.
Right.
I mean, he threw eggs at me at one time. He threw a bottle of juice that busted at my feet at me one time, and then one time during the filming of the fight scene, he was so into wanting to do and experience everything that Andy experienced. We were getting ready to, we were doing the pile driver scene, so he had actually called the week before we flew out to Hollywood to do the thing. He called. I got a call in like 2:30 in the morning, and I wake up and it's Jim Carrey and Danny DeVito and somebody from the studio and an insurance guy. 4 people on a conference call with me at 2:30 in the morning, and I'm like, what the hell? Anyway, and Jim Carrey and them are asking me, do you think it would be possible for me to actually give Jim a pile driver without him getting hurt? And because Jim was adamant on the fact that he didn't want to use a stunt double. He wanted me to actually give him a pile driver so that it would be so realistic. And it would be just like what happened to Andy. But the movie, the people that were doing the movie, the insurance people and all this, they were against it. Danny DeVito was one of the producers. He was against it.
Right.
And but Jim was getting me on the line to try to convince him that there was no way he could get hurt. And so I'm telling him, I said, well, I've given a pile driver to 1,000 people, and I've never really hurt anybody yet. So I'm pretty confident I can do it, without him getting hurt. But anyway, one thing led to another. They wouldn't allow it. So we're getting ready to film the scene out in Hollywood, and they had a stunt double that looked as much like Jim Carrey as Jim Carrey did. It was amazing.
Yeah.
This guy's all dressed up just like Jim Carrey, and so they had when they're filming, they took the Olympic Auditorium out there, and they tried to make it look like the Mid-South Coliseum. And a funny story, and I guess the writers were from Hollywood, and they bought into so much of the shtick that Andy had said. We get out there and get ready to film this scene, and it's supposed to be the Mid-South Coliseum. And Steve, I look in the audience, and they've got probably 1,000 extras in this audience, and about half of them are wearing straw hats and overalls.
That's from the South, right?
Cowboy hats, right?
Yeah.
So I went over to the director, and I said, man, let me tell you something. I said, Memphis is not like some podunk hillbilly town. I said, I don't think I've ever seen anybody wear a straw hat. I've been wrestling there for 20 years. I said, I've never seen anybody wear a straw hat to the match. And I said, and not all of these cowboy hats either. I said, it's not like a hillbilly town. I said, Memphis is a blues town. It's not that, So I swear this costuming guy gets out a megaphone. He goes up and says, everybody that's wearing a cowboy hat, lose the cowboy hat and straw hats, put them under your seats. So about 100 people take off these cowboy hats and put them up under their seats, right? So we get ready to start filming the fight scene. And so Jim does all the lead up to the stuff of the antagonistic things, and then finally he gets me in the headlock, and he's standing with me in the headlock, and the director goes, cut. And so then the stunt double comes in, and Jim gets out of the ring, the stunt double comes in, puts me in the headlock. I pick this guy up, and he says, action! I pick him up, boom, drop him on his head, and the director yells, cut! He rolls out of the ring, Jim rolls back in, and he lays down where that guy was, his action. And so then I reach over, they get a tight shot of Jim's face. I reach over, I pick him up, I stick his head between my legs for the pile driver, and the director yells, cut! He gets out of the ring. The stunt double gets in, puts his head between my legs. Action! I pick him up. Boom! Give him the pile driver. Same thing. Cut. In rolls Jim, and we go through this for about 10 takes, right? And finally, the people in the audience are actually yelling at Carrey, "What's the matter? You afraid to get a pile driver?" some of these extras are actually heckling him, right? And so we're getting ready, and this was amazing. It was like director Milos Forman gets on the microphone and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're getting antsy. I promise you this is the last take. We're going to do this one more time. We're just readjusting some lights. This is going to be the last take, and then we'll call it a wrap. Everybody will be able to go home." So everybody applauds, right? So I'm standing there in my corner, and all of a sudden here comes Bob Zamuda, who was Andy's best friend and writer and everything, real life Andy, and he comes walking over to me in the ring, and he's just talked to Jim, who's in the other corner, and Bob Zamuda kind of under his breath says, "Hey Jerry, on this take, when you pick him up for the pile driver, and the director yells cut, he said just go ahead and give him the pile driver, and we'll have it on film, and there'll be nothing they can do about it." And he said, "Jim wants you to give him the pile driver." And so then he turns around and walks back across the ring, right? So now I'm thinking, holy crap. Now this is all on me. I'm going to give this guy a pile driver, and I know what he's going to do. He's going to lay there like he's hurt. He's going to have him call in an ambulance and all this crap, just like Andy did.
Yep.
And I said, and I'm going to look like the big a-hole, right?
Yeah.
So the director, Milos Forman, is walking by. He said, "Everybody in the place says get ready." And I leaned down and I said, "Milos." And he said, "Yes, Jerry." And I said, "Andy just sent Bob Zamuda over here." Or not Andy. I said, "Jim just sent Bob Zamuda over." And he said, when you yell cut, he wants me to go ahead and give him the pile driver. And he just wants to take the pile driver. And he said, "Oh, Jetty, I'm so glad you told me. Thank you very much." He gets the megaphone. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. We're through for the day. Thank you very much." Oh my gosh. I looked over, and Jim Carrey was freaking furious. His eyes got as big as saucers, and he's looking at me, and he storms out to the middle of the ring, and he grabs the ring and he grabs the microphone that the ring announcer was using, and he starts feeding the house, and he said, "Let me tell you people something. I wanted to take a pile driver, but the insurance people, and they were afraid, and they wouldn't let me do it. I'm not afraid." And all of a sudden, they cut the microphone off. Suddenly, he couldn't be heard, and he was really even more furious now, right? So he starts screaming, "I have worked on Broadway, and I do not need a microphone to be heard. I am not afraid to take the pile driver. Lawler's just afraid to give it to me." And he comes right over. I mean, this was like a total shoot. He comes right over and gets right in my face, and veins are bulging out in the side of his neck. I'm looking at him like he's nuts, and he just looks at me, and he spits right in my face.
Wow.
It's a big hogger right in my face. And I went, "What the?" And I just lost it. And suddenly I think he came to his senses, realized what he had done, and he runs. He turns around, he starts running across the ring. I've just lost it then, and I run across, and I catch him right before he can slide out of the ring by his neck. I had him in like a reverse face lock, right? A reverse chin lock. And he's tried to slide out underneath the bottom rope. Now, he had about a 300-pound, this big black guy that was his security guard. He sees what's going on, so he grabs Carrey by the ankles, and he's trying to pull him out of the ring, and I got him by his neck, and I'm pulling him back into the ring, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, what am I going to do? I can beat up Jim Carrey here in front of the world, right? So I let him go, and the guy pulls him down onto the floor, and sure enough, wouldn't you know, they call an ambulance. He goes to the hospital. I go back to my trailer and everything, and he goes to the hospital, and I didn't hear any more until later on that night at like 11 o'clock news. I swear there's a freaking big hurricane. I don't know what the hurricane was. There's this hurricane going on in Florida. People are getting their homes blown away and everything. It's a big, huge news. And the lead story on the 11 o'clock news was Jim Carrey injured by a wrestler on the set of Man on the Moon. News at 11, film at 11. And that was like the huge, big story of all of Hollywood. And then the next day, I get word that I'm fired from the movie. And that I go home and Jim Carrey wants me replaced and all the scenes reshot with somebody else. And so I'm just thinking, geez, what am I going to do now? Anyway, I go home, and about a week goes by, and I didn't hear from anybody except all this news that I'm off the movie, and they're going to replace me and everything. And then about a week later, I get a call from Milos Forman and the director, and he says, "Jerry, can you be in New York on this date? We're going to film the Letterman scenes with David Letterman." And I said, I thought I'm fired. I thought he wanted me over there. He's calmed down. Everything is okay. We got it all smoothed over. We love you, Jetty. You're terrific.
Of course they do.
so the funny thing was then of course, the scenes we were shooting next were the Letterman, where I got to slap him. And man, oh man, did I pace that son of a bitch. I hit Jim Carrey so freaking hard, much harder than I hit Andy Kaufman. And he got up and he was holding the side of his head. He said, "Oh my God, you really punked me out on that one." And he said, "Milos, I hope you got that on one take, because I can't do that again."
So he knew he'd been a jackass, huh?
Oh yeah, he knew it. And he gave me this nice North Face jacket, and he gave me a bunch of gifts and stuff like that. And you know what? I swear to God, just a few weeks ago, I haven't heard from Jim Carrey in years. A few weeks ago, I get a call from his secretary and says, "Jim has something he wants to give you. He wanted to get your mailing address." I think, what? And so I give him my mailing address. I give her my mailing address, and I said, "What is it?" She said, "Oh, I can't tell you. It's going to be a surprise."
Oh, good. We don't like surprises.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, a couple of days later, I get this box, a not very big box, in the mail, and I open it up. There's this letter, a handwritten note from Jim Carrey, and it was weird in the sense that apparently somebody gave Jim Carrey the costume that I wore, the wrestling costume that I wore in the movie Man on the Moon, and apparently he thought it was from me. I don't know. I never saw I wanted the costume. I never saw it after the making of the movie.
Right.
But in this letter it says, "Dear Jerry, the gift of the costume that you wore in Man on the Moon is possibly one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. Working with you in that movie was both an odyssey and was a shining moment in something, I don't know, like really putting me over, right?" And he said, "I know that you have dabbled in music and cut your own albums." He said, "I just wanted to give you something from my record album collection, and I hope you enjoy it." And he said, "Next time you're in L.A., he said, I have a suite at the Staples Center. Give me a call. I'd love to have you as my guest." And so anyway, that's the letter. And then in the box were about 8 record albums, pristine condition, mint condition record albums, all by wrestlers. All like there was the Hulk Hogan WWE album,
right.
Album by Sweet Daddy Siki, album by Antonio Rocco, all of these different wrestlers that over the years, I mean, some of them went back to the 60s and everything. All of these records that had been cut by wrestlers that somehow he had in his record collection, and he sent them all to me for some reason or other. But anyway, that was his gift that he sent.
So do you play them all the time?
No, I've never played any.
Hey, before we wrap this one up, and you got to come back on the show, because I knew when we started talking there was going to take multiple shows. But before we wrap up the conversation about Andy Kaufman and yourself, at one point during the feud, you wrestled a guy on behalf of, Jim Carrey, and he was the Colossus of Death.
Right.
Who was the Colossus of Death? I must know.
The Colossus of Death was, oh my gosh, what is his name? He came in with the Garvins. He was the big guy. He came in with Jimmy Garvin as his partner. Oh, Steve, I'm the world's worst on trying to remember.
Just part of the way he walked across the ring with his hands up. I was thinking Plan 9 from outer space. It was a tremendous. And then you'd go ahead and lock up with him because he had his arms out. Kind of like walking like he was sleepwalking, kind of.
Right, like Frankenstein.
Yeah,
walked like Frankenstein.
I just had to know who the Colossus of Death.
Oh my gosh! If the next time you have me back, I'll have his name. I just can't recall it right now. But and you would know him. Oh gosh!
One of the lines also, I think, when Kaufman kind of started feuding with Jimmy Hart there towards the end, they had their little tiff, and I guess Kaufman slapped Jimmy Hart, and Hart was running off in the mouth that he had been slapped in front of 355,000 people. 355,000 people. I guess at the time that was the population of Memphis.
Exactly.
That was tremendous.
That was our viewing audience. That was our Saturday morning ratings, and we were, in Memphis. Of course, you were proud. Because the population of Memphis literally was about 700,000 people, and we had on Saturday mornings 355,000 of those people were watching Saturday morning wrestling. So that was a huge. That was a big news story in Memphis. So for him, that's what he was referring to at the time. And of course, to everybody that was watching, that did seem like a huge a huge amount of people for Memphis TV. But you're right, the little tiff that when we worked Andy in, and it all became a ruse as they were actually working together to get back at me in the end. But when we had the little interview set there with Andy and Jimmy Hart fighting, if you watch that, it's the best non-fight scene you'll ever see. Both these guys are like two girls slapping at each other. Neither one of them made contact with anything, and it was the funniest and the greatest pull-apart that there's ever been in wrestling, if you ask me.
Well, I'm talking to Jerry the King Lawler. You can follow him on Twitter, at Jerry Lawler. At Jerry Lawler on Twitter. His website is www.KingJerryLawler.com. Jerry, thanks for coming on the show. I hope you had a good time, because I've got 6 pages of notes I didn't even get to yet, so please say you'll come back.
I know, I get a little long-winded sometimes, especially when I'm talking about myself. So
it ain't long-winded.
I'll be more than glad to come back anytime.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
Pluto TV is the place for movie fans like me.
And TV fans like me.
They've got something for everyone, and it's totally free.
You can binge laugh-out-loud sitcoms like Frasier.
And rewatch cult classics like Higher Learning.
Whether you're in the mood to solve a little crime before bedtime with NCIS or Tracker.
Or curl up with a surefire hit like Forrest Gump.
Run, Forrest! Pluto TV has thousands of movies and shows, all for free.
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.